BuyIn, just what we need. BuyIn is a structure in the brain of modern Homo sapiens, that's you, that supports group work on projects. It is exactly what we need to employ right now to address global warming. BuyIn has not been identified in any other species, not in chimps, not in Neanderthals. It is probably a network of pre-existing brain modules rather than a specific newly evolved module, like Eureka. More work is needed to understand exactly what BuyIn is. BuyIn evolved to support projects at the village level, such as building a common longhouse. As civilizations grew, BuyIn enabled larger and larger projects. Building community buildings grew to building defensive walls surrounding complete cities. Building tombs to bury kings grew to building great pyramids. Building temples grew to building Gothic cathedrals. Building ships for trade and exploration grew to Apollo to the moon. Whenever a large number of people are working together on a major project, BuyIn is there. With the recent release of United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Special Report 1.5, and, hard on its heels, the United States' Fourth National Climate Assessment, the need for effective action on climate change is now clear. We need millions of people in action on hundreds of ideas to both reduce carbon in the atmosphere and to adapt societies to climate change. We need BuyIn in a big way, and we need it right now. To date, leading climate activists have primarily tried to use fear to try to scare people into action on climate problems. It is true, fear can get people into action quickly, but the effect usually lasts for only a short time and its continued use can lead to burnout. We need now to move out of the fear phase and into new approaches. BuyIn is a viable alternative, but our leaders do not seem even to know that BuyIn exists, nor that it is such a powerful tool. Part of BuyIn's recognition problem is that BuyIn has many names depending on who is discussing it. For the military, it is part of recruitment and they are very good at it indeed. When you understand BuyIn, you will then understand why a Marine in full dress uniform and proudly holding a sword recruits just the right people for them. Personal development organizations use a number of terms so that their copyrights are protected. Perhaps the best known is Landmark Education's use of the term enrollment. Various BuyIn concepts are also used extensively in commercial advertising. In fact, BuyIn is very close to sales, but there are key differences. That said, technical people invariably use the word BuyIn and use the concept extensively to build a workforce for their projects. For them, the term BuyIn is nearly universally understood in the context of buying into a project, even if a more precise definition is not widely known. The details of BuyIn now are sufficiently understood to allow it to be taught as a leadership skill. Here are 6 clear steps suitable for instruction of potential leaders so that they can successfully invite people to BuyIn. The training here is simplified from a day-long course. In this discussion, the leader is the person trying to generate BuyIn and the listener is the person open to BuyIn. The leader must make a well-thought-out presentation on a specific idea. This presentation may include any combination of graphics, animations, and voice. A few personal stories may be useful, particularly at the start of the talk. Early on, the leader must state clearly the leader's intentions for the talk. Specifically, the leader is inviting people to buy into the idea. The talk must be interesting to the listener and hold the listener's attention. The leader must be sure that all the major points of the idea are covered, but not to make the presentation too long or too boring. Pull out all the stops. Give the presentation all you have. The next step is a critical key and must be at the very end of the presentation. It is the actual invitation to BuyIn. Stop all the fancy graphics. Stop the music. Present the idea as a banner in a line or two of pure text. Phrase the text in the form of an invitation to action. The leader can leave on a simple feel-good graphic, like a car winding down an impossibly beautiful road, but the presentation must not detract from the text message for the buy-in brain structures to function properly. Very important. The presentation must have held the listener's interest. A shoddy presentation or a poor speaker will not do. When the presentation pauses, that is the invitation for the listener to have a very specific daydream. It is a daydream about him or herself winning with the idea. The daydream need not be long. 10 seconds of dreaming can put a person in action for a decade, but it must be very clear. A vague or cloudy image will not do. This is the key step. Without this daydream, the listener will not get into action. The reason that the end pause and language is necessary is simply because the human brain has only one vision center, which is at the back of the head. If this vision center is tied up analyzing interesting visual materials, then it will not be available to daydream. It is that simple. This is also why technical people and artists depend so heavily on buy-in. They are simply trained in envisioning ideas. If the buy-in brain structure has been triggered in the listener will feel compelled to speak. The speech center in the brain is not involved directly in daydreaming, but it is triggered at the end of the buy-in process just the same. The spoken words are a strong marker, and the leader must make time for these responses in the meeting, and control this process. Often, particularly in young people, the verbalization may only be a few words, like cool or far out. That is okay. However, if a listener asks a long drawn-out question, almost certainly, they were composing the question in the daydreaming period and the buy-in did not take. Real presentation skills are needed from the leader to both make an engrossing presentation and then control the speak-up period. This simply takes talent. The leader must have ready things that the listener can do to get in action. The sooner the action, the better. The leader needs to be sure that there are knowledgeable people in the audience who the new buy-inner can talk to. They can take their cue from the speak-up session. A 10-second buy-in can keep a person in action for a decade. To accomplish this longevity, the idea must turn out to be very fulfilling for the listener, but this too is common. Often the listener had never even thought about being involved in these actions before the presentation, and it may take time and personal effort before they find themselves. If their interest builds over time, the listeners are usually very grateful. Later, when resolution falters, the listener may simply go back to the daydream that started it all. Buy-in daydreams are very memorable. The steps of buy-in are simple but not well known. They require leaders with talent, training, and dedication. They require listeners who are open to new ideas. None of this is hard, none of this is particularly rare. All of it is critical at this time in the history of civilization. Society needs millions of people in effective action on answers to climate change. Buy-in is the key. Here are a few extra points about buy-in. Informal buy-in is very common and the daydreams are quite memorable. Young people in school often buy into the avocation that they will pursue for their lifetime from a lecture, or a talk, or something they read. Long after, they can usually recall at least snatches of the daydream that did the job for them, and often the time, the place, and the person. Self-buy-in is common too, especially among technical people. The person simply thinks up an idea and then daydreams about how successful they will be with it. The drawback is that this often pulls them back from social engagement and can turn the listener into a loner. Please note that buy-in is always accomplished through an invitation and can never be coerced. You are offering people an opportunity that they can take up or not take up. Sales and buy-in are very close. The primary difference is that sales ends with the transfer of money for a product or service, but buy-in ends with the listener in action over time. They are just different enough that people good at one need not be good at the other. If a person says that they want to sell an idea, what they really want to do is generate buy-in for the idea. They will probably fare much better if they understand the difference. Suppose that sometime you find yourself in a situation where someone is really putting the hard sale on you. Does your new knowledge of how buy-in actually works help you? Of course it does. All you have to do is daydream about failing with the idea. Then you will not need to give the idea another thought. In most buy-in situations, success with 2% of the listeners is good, success with 5% is very good indeed. This is enough success to keep most efforts moving forward and growing. Buy-in generation requires talent and training. Above all, buy-in requires leadership. Our challenge now is to generate the buy-in needed to save the human societies of Earth. The Earth itself has survived much worse before, it will survive this too. The two reports, UNIPCC Special Report 1.5, and NCA 4, have now defined our common problem and pointed us in the directions where actions are needed. It is time to stop scaring people and, instead, get people to work. We know what needs to be done. We know how to make a great start. We must now simply leave the climate deniers in our dust. We can do this. Thanks for your attention. Please visit our website. You can Google The Big Moon Dig for our contact information and free stories about believable characters, like me, JanetA, in dedicated action on many problems of climate change. Please subscribe to see more videos in this series. Thank you, JanetA and Tom Riley. The Big Moon Dig.